live, and as some comrades say, it's lit, right? Lit. The revolution is lit.
Uhuru Comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Malika Zaire Alexander, and I'm coordinator of the Arrest CPS campaign for the African Women's Organization and a member of the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Today's study is highly important, and we encourage you right now to share this stream, invite your friends and family to it so that as many of our people can be involved in this discussion. This week, the chairman continues reading from the book Materialism and the Dialectical Method by Maurice Conworth, Chapter 9, titled The New and the Old, pages 86 through 92, and Chapter 10, titled The Negation of Negation, pages 93 through 99. In this study, we will learn that political and historical events occur due to the conflict of social forces, which helps us to identify problems and their solutions. This helps us move away from the idealistic explanations offered up by the ruling class and gives us the tools to apply revolutionary science for practical and real-world solutions. In this study, Chairman deepens our understanding of the necessity of having our own theory, African internationalism, and the worldview of the African working class. With these studies, we strive to churn out African working class intellectuals, one to the understanding that this world can be changed with our own hands and the practical implementation of our theory. We ask you to begin to prepare your questions regarding the topic so Chairman can expound more on certain ideas. You can also catch up on this reading by viewing the previous 7 Omali Taught Me's available on the Burning Spear TV YouTube page. To deepen our understanding of the dialectical materialism and its practical application, I proudly introduce to you my leadership, the brilliant theologian behind African internationalism, the theory developed with the understanding of the dialectical materialistic method leading to practical solutions for African and colonized people worldwide. I bring you now Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
Uhuru Comrades, I think that was a Freudian lapse. This characterization of being a theologian, but it's probably appropriate given the fact that we are talking about materialism, and we are talking about materialism as opposed to idealism. And theology is an idealistic approach to understanding and explaining the world. But we do want to express appreciation to all of you for coming on to this discussion. And the discussions that we've been having over the last several weeks dealing with the issue of dialectical and historical materialism. And I want to remind you that it's not something that we do for the purpose of trying to display some brilliance or for the purpose of simply accumulating these esoteric ideas that's usually contained within universities or within these left forums that don't have any relationship to changing the world. But our objective is to change the world. And we know that the real power for changing the world is in the African working class itself. In fact, we have a saying that the road to socialism is painted black, and we mean that literally. And the basis of our being able to say that lies in our philosophy. And our philosophy is a scientific philosophy. Everybody has a philosophy, even theologians. But the thing that distinguishes a scientific philosophy in part from just a philosophy is the fact that a scientific philosophy is one that is falsifiable. And that is to say that one is able to look at this, to hear this, and to be able to recognize as the basis for being able to conclude that it is correct or incorrect. For example, on one part of our discussion dealing with the issue of the rise of capitalism and the origin of capitalism, we raised the question that could falsify our view of whether or not capitalism could exist or would exist as we know it without the rape of Africa and the enslavement of African people and the existence of colonialism and neocolonialism around the world. And if you can conclude that it is that we say our philosophy is falsifiable, because one can say, can look at that question and can answer that question concretely by evidence in the world. This makes it falsifiable. And if you come up and say, well, slavery and capitalism would have happened without this, and then African internationalism can be declared incorrect. The fact is that there is a question that you can ask that allows us to falsify the philosophy. So everybody has a philosophy. We say ours is a scientific philosophy. And the thing that again helps us to understand that it is scientific because part of it is because it's falsifiable. So I want to just remind us that we have been involved in this, that is to say the African People's Socialist Party for 50 years or so, involved in the struggle for our liberation. And very early on in our development, we have really strived to create a scientific approach. We've had to answer a lot of the questions that most movements have been, of our communities, have been faced with. We've had to especially assault in the African People's Socialist Party this assumption somehow of the struggle of African people being some kind of exceptional struggle that unlike the people of Vietnam and unlike people in other countries that somehow we can win our freedom without fighting for it, or if we do fight for it, that it doesn't have to be based on any kind of science. We don't have to have a revolutionary organization. Depends on what God you pray to or don't pray to. But depends on what juju, whether you've got juju or not. you know, these kinds of expressions. We've seen it, and sometimes there have been biological explanations. We have a philosophy based on the melanin content. We have a philosophy sometimes based on religion, all of these things. And so the struggle to come up with a scientific approach to it, and we do this not because we want to get a lot of likes on social media, but because we need to change this world that we live in. We need to really make freedom happen for our people. And as the African People's Socialist Party, advanced detachment, that is to say, the vanguard of the revolutionary struggle for the liberation of our people and the advanced detachment of the African working class, then it is our responsibility to make this happen. And we believe that the source, the key fundamental force that's going to make this revolution happen is the African working class, not the petty bourgeoisie, not the professors, not those people who are so handy with the quip and fast talking and who've necessarily read all the books that can explain the world, but people who the foundation upon which this whole thing rests, that it rests upon the working class, the oppressed sector of the African population, and along with the other peoples around the world who are engaged primarily in the production of value for a rotten, foul social system that has its origin in slavery, genocide, and colonialism, that this is the source of the revolution. And to make this happen, it means that we, as the advanced detachment, have to take this science right into the most oppressed sectors of our community, and we have to create organizations of revolutionaries who are also, that is, the revolutionary organization is also comprised of working class intellectuals. Thinking representatives of the working class, like the bourgeoisie, the white ruling class. They are thinking representatives. We've quoted from them over and over again, and to some extent, while not necessarily intending to do so, even Cornforth, who we're looking at today, represent the thinking representative of the most progressive sector of the colonizer population, as opposed to those of us who are colonized. And we have a responsibility, and if Cornforth doesn't understand that, then he's got a problem, because he is a part of the colonizer nation, because the world that we live in is one that is characterized primarily by this contradiction between the oppressed nations and the oppressor nations. And this is the contest we are involved in, and we believe in the African People's Socialist Party that the source for overturning this relationship is in the African working class itself. And even though there are progressive forces within the African petty bourgeoisie, and they do exist, they exist in virtually every community, every country, you will find among the petty bourgeoisie sectors who will abandon the interests of the bourgeoisie or the petty bourgeoisie and unite with the interests of the working class. That makes sense, because the petty bourgeoisie is a dying social force. Even though it's not necessarily conscious of it, it is a dying social force. It has no future. And the future lies with the workers, the oppressed peoples of the world, the workers of the world, in the colonized countries and territories, and that includes African people ourselves. So that's what I want to say. So we've talked up to now. This is the 9th chapter in Cornforth's Materialism and the Dialectical Method, and we've talked about party philosophy. We talked about philosophy itself and why it's important. And we've talked about this from the vantage point and the interests of the working class, the African people, the African working class. And we have to say that because most times when we think of philosophy, we think of something that happens in these rarefied atmospheres of universities, etc., where you have these bald, bespectacled, bearded white guys who drop gems of wisdom that you know it represents brilliance because you don't understand a damn thing they said, right? But the thing is that we saying that the working class has to have its own revolutionary philosophy. Because if you don't have our own philosophy, we end up borrowing from the philosophers of the ruling class because philosophy prevails. And the dominant force in society is that society that has thinking representatives, that creates institutions for the purpose of turning out thinking representatives of that class. And so the reason that we detest the idea of philosophy often is because the philosophy that we've become familiar with, or at least we've heard of, is that philosophy churned out by these ruling class institutions that do not serve our interests. This philosophy ends up being the dominant philosophy in the society. That's just the way it is. So we talked about party philosophy. We talked about materialism and idealism, and which is really important. And when we talk about materialism, we also say that how we understand materialism is in opposition to idealism. And materialism, we talk about phenomenon, things, experiences, processes in the world that we can understand through the utilization of our senses, our sight, our hearing, our taste, our smell, our touch. This is material reality. And that every other thing that we think we know, everything, gods and religions and everything that we think we know have a basis in material reality, concrete material reality. And that we contest this notion, we approach this question of priority of spiritual versus material in a really calm and scientific way. Mind over matter is something we've heard of. You've seen the bumper stickers saying things like, I think, therefore I am, which is bass backwards. You are, therefore you think. And because we understand that even the mind is a product of matter developed to its highest stage, which is the brain. And you can resolve any discussion or debate or argument around that question if the proponents of the superiority or the priority of mind over matter was willing to participate in a simple experiment. You can get such a person who believes that the mind is more is prior to matter to simply shoot himself in the head and then tell us what he thinks about that. And the reality is that gives us the clearest example of that the mind itself is a product of matter, which is the brain. The matter developed to a very high place. So we talked about mechanistic materialism, an assumption of materialism. You're able to recognize, yes, there is, the matter is prior, but you can only understand that in some kind of mechanical way. You can't understand that matter doesn't simply exist. Matter exists as a consequence of motion, of being in motion. It is a condition for existence. Motion is a condition for the existence of matter. Going all the way to atoms and molecules and etc. That it is matter itself in motion. It is the motion that allows us to stand on the floor, to put this on this paper that I have now on this table. The reason this table can support the materials I put on it is because in both instances you've got this tremendous motion of matter in the table, inside the table, and on the papers that I have here. That is a condition for their existence. So to talk of simply recognizing the existence of matter is not good enough. We have to recognize that matter is in a constant state of motion, and that matter is something also that is in a relationship with all other things around it. It helps to define what it is. And so that's the dialectical approach. If we understand that we look at things in nature and in society, partially dialectics tell us that they're in a permanent state of coming into existence and going out of existence. From the moment a child is born, we have life, and more often than not, the life is the dominant factor, primary factor in its existence. But the moment it's born, there's also enters into a process of dying away, and that this is dialectics. Everything is in a state of coming into existence and going out of existence, and it's really important for us to understand that. Otherwise, you end up thinking just because your enemy is powerful and strong, etc., that it's always going to be powerful and strong in relationship to you, or that it always has to be. That frightens and terrifies people. People can't struggle sometimes because they talk about how bad the white man is, how strong America is. And so if you don't understand, if you don't have a dialectical approach, you can say if you're a materialist, because I understand America got all these guns and got all this power and got all this stuff. That's one thing that you can understand. But if you know how it came into existence, if you know something about it, if you know something about the history of the process that you're looking at, you also have the ability to know that as strong as it is or appears to be today, that it is in a state of disintegration, a state of dying away in relationship to other phenomena around it. And therefore, you don't base your assumption of who you're dealing with or what you're dealing with because the apparent strength of America at any given moment. You know what I'm saying, don't you? Because otherwise, you will never fight. You will always say, oh, this is too big, too strong. You hear this all the time. They got all the guns and et cetera, et cetera. So we talk about dialectical materialism. We talk about the dialectic conception of development. And development is critical because liberals and others are forced to have to look at the fact of change. See, people want to look at change. They can say change. Liberals can tolerate change. Change. This is Barack Hussein Obama. Change, 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 And that's like going into a dressing room when you go to wherever you buy your clever shirts and things like that and put on another shirt and you've changed. But that's not development. We use the example of how you can get a worm that grows fatter and longer, etc. It's just a fatter and longer worm. But when it turns into a butterfly, that's development. So you look at the question of change, you're simply looking at a change in the degree. It's hotter or colder, faster, slower, bigger, smaller. But that's not development. Development is a change in the actual state of the thing. We use the example of water, which is a liquid. And you put water as a liquid on a hot stove and a kettle and heat it. And first, the change is imperceptible, but change is happening. The water gets hotter and hotter. And then suddenly, and this is the thing that liberals can't tolerate, because suddenly it reaches this point where it changes from a liquid to a gas. That's the steam. That's the gas, right? And so you have this big change. That's development. And that's what we need to know, that a thing can change and it can be imperceptible. If you know this, then you are, and if you know that unless something is broken, that's always going to happen. You always are going to get the liquid changed into another state, which is now the gas, which is development as opposed to simpler change. Change, simply the water gets hot. But suddenly, boom, the water now changes into a gas. A liquid changes into a gas that we call steam. You got to know that. You have to understand that. Now, there are circumstances under which that won't happen. For example, the kettle may have a hole in it, right? Or the stove might go out. The fire might go out. But if everything works normally, then you will get steam. But because you know you will get steam, you know you will get a gas. If you don't get a gas, then you go look and see what the hell is wrong with the process. It helps you to investigate. If you didn't have that, then what would happen is that you'd have to stand over the kettle all day to see if it's going to actually get hot, if it actually is going to change into steam. If you want tea, you need for it to get to reach a certain temperature so that it's capable of boiling and transforming from that liquid state into this gaseous state. You'll see. Yeah, but if you didn't know that, every time you put the water on, you have to stand there to see if it was going to heat up. Now, and that's what we say about this. If you have a burning spear newspaper and you go out in your community every day with the burning spear newspaper to inform the masses of the people, the change is immediately imperceptible. You don't automatically see the change all the time just because you're going out there, but at the point where things happen and come together correctly in this world that you're working in, you know that the masses are the real makers of history. You know that an informed African population can understand these contradictions we deal with, and then suddenly you have this transformation in the community that you work in. People say, well, what's wrong with our people? They don't do this, do that. No, do the work in the community. Put the heat, put the kettle on the heat, turn it on, and it will get hot, and it will, at a certain point, when it reaches that thing that's called a nodal point, you will have a change in the state from simply hot to boom, simply hot water and simply hot liquid into a gas. If it doesn't happen, then we come back with our burning spear newspaper and we say, hey, we're not putting what needs to be in this paper to make it happen correctly. Or we're not putting the steam, we're not heating this thing the way it should be. In other words, we're not going out there with the kind of frequency we should be out there. We're not using all the methods we should be using to heat this damn pot if we want it to get hot. But we know the pot will get hot. We know we have that kind of science. That's why this approach that we have, that's why we have a newspaper. That's why we have a radio station, not just to have a damn newspaper. And some people can be preoccupied with just having a newspaper, just we got a radio station. No. The objective is to heat the water until we get a transformation that we get gas, right? You understand what we're saying? That's what's so important about having a scientific approach. Otherwise, what would we do? I mean, we pray to the kettle, right? Oh, water, please get hot. You understand? Etc. And people have done that. Pray to the gods, the sun gods and the corn gods and other stuff to make the stuff happen, right? But we don't do that, right? What we do is create a what? Plan of action, don't we? To carry out the strategy that we know will heat the damn water so that we can get a change from hot water into another state, which is gas, right? Anyway, so that's some of the stuff we've gone over, and it's already being too long in terms of an introduction to the discussion, but I wanted to just say some of the stuff we've gone through, and of course you have access to this, you can look at it, and for us it was really important to start it to use Cornforth because he offers a structure for the discussion, and it contains some things that we think need to be discussed. We think people need to have an understanding of philosophy, and because humans have been involved in this struggle for philosophy for long periods of time. Like the whole fundamental questions having to do with the priority or the primary, which is prior, like matter or spirit and things like that, and that helps to distinguish the approach that you take to every question. And we, in our communities, in the African communities, where we haven't had access to a real independent kind of development. So sometimes we're locked into thinking things that we were thinking 500-600 years ago when the imperialists first intervened in our life. I mean, I've gone to one of these, I can't remember what it's called, in North Carolina, I think it is this, supposed to be like an African village, where they've got huts, and you come in and you give them some money and you buy some cowrie shells or something like that, and you pretend that you in an African village because you purchased this stuff that they've bought from other places and with cowrie shells. And so you're supposed to be experiencing African reality. That's not African reality. What you're doing is experiencing a reality that most often predated the white man coming and attacking Africa. It presupposes that Africa never would have developed beyond that, or you're looking at something that has happened to Africa subsequent to the white man getting there, and they pushed us back into history so that we no longer have possession of our own productive process. So what we are talking about is something quite different from that. So I'm going to look just briefly at Cornforth, and I think we're at chapter 9, and the title of that chapter is The New and the Old. And I'm hoping that you will read this, because I am not going to read most of this. What I'm going to do is sort of introduce this, then I'm going to go to Vanguard, which is the political report to the 7th Congress, and show you how what Cornforth is talking about in principle actually realizes itself in the real world in terms of discussion of our theory, our philosophy, and the conclusions that we've come through, how we move in a certain way. And we give you Cornforth, some stuff from Cornforth that can be helpful in terms of understanding perhaps some stuff we've written about in our political report, and this one and others. So here's what Cornforth is talking about. In chapter 9, it talks about the new and the old. And the struggle of opposed forces, which constitutes the driving force of development, does not take place accidentally, but on the basis of internal contradictions inherent in the very nature of the processes concerned. You hear that? The struggle of opposed forces, which constitutes the driving force of development, does not take place accidentally, but on the basis of internal contradictions inherent in the very nature of the processes concerned. And that's why we always say, at the moment you say that African people are oppressed, right? If you can come to that conclusion, then you must conclude that there is an oppressor, right? That's the dialectic. This is the contest that's prevalent all the time. And we're saying that it is this struggle of opposed forces that constitutes the driving force of development. It's the basis of internal contradictions inherent in the very nature of the processes concerned. The processes concerned. In this instance, we are really talking about capitalism. And capitalism came into existence through colonialism. What people refer to is imperialism. Sometimes people call it slavery, what happened to us in Africa. That's how white people defined it. But before white people defined what was happening to us as slavery, they defined what was happening among white people as slavery. They talk about this whole period in ancient days when the Romans enslaved others. Even the word slave itself comes from the Slavs, groups of white people in Europe, the Slavs. You've heard of Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia, but there's Yugoslavia and Russians and things like that, Slavs. This is where the word slave comes from. This is part of the reason that the Russians have labored under such an inferiority complex when related to the rest of Europe. You didn't know that. But the educated Russians didn't even speak Russian. What they speak? They speak French. That's what they spoke. There was a whole thing about being Russian in the rest of Europe. So the word slave comes from that. So the slavery that was slavery, and according to the Marxist theory of development of human society, it begins from their perspective, from Cornforth's perspective, with this period of what they would refer to in ancient times of a primitive communism, or a primitive communalism, if you will. And that the society, as he understood it, moves, Marx and Cornforth, moves from this primitive communism because of the internal contradictions, and it's hard to get to that question of internal contradiction, but it's not impossible. And because during this primitive communism that they talked about, there was no exploitation, there was no oppression of women, and that there was equality inside the society itself. There was no exploitation of workers and things like that. But moving from internal contradictions that they find there, they go into this period that they call slavery. They're not talking about what happened to us. They're talking about Kirk Douglas and Spartacus. And you're too young to know what Kirk Douglas and Spartacus is. But Spartacus, of course, was this this guy who led slave rebellions against the Romans a long time ago. That's what they're talking about. So I'm saying that can't be slavery, and then what happened to Africa and us slavery at the same time. If you accept their definition of slavery, then slavery was a mode of production that happened and on the way toward what came to be known as feudalism, and then from feudalism to capitalism, from capitalism to communism. This was the stair-step mode of development according to the Marxist theory. I hope that wasn't too much and too complex, but that's how they put it. So what happened? What the hell happened to us? And I'm saying what happened to us, we call it colonial slavery. Colonialism. This is a new phenomenon. It's not the same thing that the Europeans went through. You call it slavery if you want to, but it's not this consequence of development inside Europe when you look at what happened to us. It's a colonial slavery. Europe stepped outside of itself and then went to the rest of the world. It wasn't even Europe at that time, and it's really important to understand this. When white people went to Africa and began to capture us and capture other territories around the world that contributed to the development of Europe at the expense of the rest of us, we got a single process now. Do you understand? You got these contending forces now locked into this deadly embrace. Do you understand what just happened? Because the Marxists don't understand that. Cornforth didn't understand that. And the white left that we deal with do not understand this. Right. It's like I went through this whole thing about producing biscuits. You remember that? Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't tell you, by the way, when I was talking about biscuits, that it's a half a teaspoonful of salt and a tablespoon of baking powder. So, but I went through this whole process. And so you got baking powder, you got butter, you got or butter substituted vegan biscuits. And you got salt, you got, this stuff, and you have to, add, like milk or milk substitute, et cetera, and stir it. And when you start off, you got butter, salt, milk, flour, all this stuff when you start off. But when you mix it up and then throw it in the oven and leave it there for a period of time, you got an entirely different product. You still got all those elements that went into it, but it's a whole different product now. And that's what they won't recognize with us. That you ain't got just the white man over here and the black man over there. You got a whole different relationship. We do not exist in some casual relationship to each other now. And so now when you look for contradictions, you don't just look for the contradiction in the white world, so what do you call it, the industrial working class has to overthrow the industrial ruling class. No. You got a whole different product now. And the main contradiction is not the contradiction between the white workers and the white ruling class. The main contradiction is in this relationship. All these forces that's been brought there to create this damn biscuit, right, at the expense, like of the rest of us. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, that's what we're looking at. That's an African internationalist approach to this question. So, anyway, so we say, again, the struggle of opposed forces, which constitutes the struggle of opposed forces, which constitutes the driving force of development, does not take place accidentally, but on the basis of internal contradictions inherent in the very nature of the processes concerned. Of the processes concerned. Of the processes. And you got a whole new process that created Europe, that created the world that we live in, that's responsible for the economic and political configuration of the world today. There arises a contradiction between the new and the old. That which is arising and growing contradicts that which is dying away and disappearing. And this fact is strikingly exemplified in the development of society. In the process of development, the new grows strong and overpowers the old. And this leads to the forward movement of development in which each stage is an advance to something new, not a falling back to some stage already past. Each stage is an advance to something new, right? And so that's the thing that frightens white people. That's why you have a spike in the death rate in the white community, et cetera, because they identify with this thing that they've been involved in all along that prioritizes their existence at the expense of everybody else, because that's an undialectical way of seeing the world. And Europeans have had the ability, white people have had the ability of seeing the world in this undialectical way. So when they see this thing, this movement of other parts of the process, it happens at the expense of the singular expense of the superiority of that part of that is white people. Do you see? Yeah. It's just like when you cooking the biscuits that we're talking about, if the butter had consciousness, you see, the butter see this thing happening at its expense. Damn, I'm losing all of this. I used to be this and that. The butter now is becoming a part. This part of this whole thing is becoming a part of a biscuit that's in the process of being created, and it loses its own sense, if it were consciousness, of significance. So, since development proceeds by the overcoming and supplanting of the old by the new, it follows that development can only proceed by the negation of the old and not by its preservation. Do you understand that? It can only proceed by the negation of the old. The butter has to die. Do you understand? But the butter doesn't just die. Something new comes as a consequence of that. This is negation. Okay. All right. So I wanted to say that. And then I want to just read something. I want to say briefly, but it's not exactly briefly. And I really want to apologize for this, because I am going to go to Vanguard, which is the political report to the 7th Congress. And I'm doing this because every political report that we've ever done was based on a dialectical and historical materialist approach to investigating and analyzing the world that we live in. Everything. And Cornforth is helpful, and going through this little stuff by Cornforth can be helpful, because it offers an explanation of what it is I'm going to be reading from in this book. It offers a way to examine what is in this book, right? We've answered these questions 1,000 times before, but we've done it in a way that presupposes a certain understanding of the people who we're talking to. And we go back now and look at Cornforth, and we look at how he has outlined this whole question of approach to philosophy, and how he's outlining. Even as we knock down many of the ideas that he has, it gives us like a template to hold this discussion, and go back and look now at the political report to the Congress. So I just want to read briefly, and some of this I may have read before, and I think that we're going to spend some time after this looking at the political report. So in the 7th Congress document, Vanguard, the book, I'm on page 286. We read some of this last time, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm going to read substantially more. And I'm hoping that the discussion we've had even up to now will contribute to how we appreciate what we'll be looking at here. So on page 286, on the second full paragraph, we say, our party and movement were forced to conclude that all humans, including Europeans, are trapped by an absolute necessity to secure and develop the means of subsistence. In other words, the primary motivating factor in human society is the production and reproduction of life. Without life, all other questions, religion, culture, genetic, etc., are moot, meaningless. Indeed, culture is a byproduct of the process of producing and reproducing life. However, the process of Africans producing and reproducing life was drastically disrupted and altered by the European attack that resulted in the capture and colonial enslavement of Africa and Africans. This attack by Europeans on Africa also resulted in the imposition of artificial borders that separate the dispersed African nation from our human and material resources and from a meaningful relationship among ourselves and with the peoples of the world. When I say we've been separated from our human and material resources, and by by these borders, and that the dispersed African nation have been separated from a meaningful relationship with among ourselves and with the peoples of the world, it's the same thing as saying that the whole process of producing and reproducing life has been disrupted. Because what do you do? How do you do that? Through the land that we live on, through the productive forces that also includes the people, workers with the knowledge of how to produce, etc. So this has been disrupted. The material and human resources of Africa have gone to satisfy the requirements of life for Europeans at the expense of Africa and Africans. If you understand this, then you understand the significance of Geiger going in and killing the young African in Dallas, Texas in his own house. The white woman cop goes and kills him in his own house. You understand the servile relationship that the neo-colonial judge woman has to that. That becomes an apologist for the ability of the colonial white state to kill us and do things to us. She is a servant of the state that is responsible for that. And the stupid brother who goes around and grinds with her after she's been convicted for killing his own brother is a product of the philosophy of the social system that is based on slavery and colonialism. That's what she's supposed to do. When he does something different, then you've got somebody who is able to resist. And all of this stuff that you see on social media where people are condemning that dumb Negro and that servile, traitorous judge, these are people who want to resist this. And even though it's a relatively primitive and relatively uninformed resistance for the most part, it is indignation based on the fact that they hate this colonial relationship that we have and the servile attitude that we take as products of this colonial relationship. So we say this progenitor of world capitalism, the progenitor of world capitalism, the attack on Africa and Africans along with the European assault on Asia and the Americas rescued Europe and Europeans from an oppressive 1,000-year-long disease-ridden, impoverished existence known as feudalism. Rescued Europe. They don't want to go back there. It was a 1,000-year-long disease-ridden, sometimes white people live in a state of utter nakedness, nothing. They don't want to go back there. And so they will protect this thing that they've got with everything they've got. Either they do that or they join with progress, and progress is joining with this rising force that's in contradiction with the old force of colonialism and colonial capitalism. That's what we talk about now that shakes up everything so much because there's an uneasy equilibrium that exists today, that the balance is shifting today from that which favors the oppressor, that favors imperialism, and is shifting in the direction of the oppressed. But the oppressed, just because the balance is shifting, it doesn't mean necessarily that we will win. It doesn't necessarily guarantee a victory for us, because of the shifting balance can simply mean we fall off. The thing is that for this to be meaningful is the reason we're having this discussion, because the advanced detachment, there must be organized, conscious revolutionaries who committed to a scientific approach, philosophical understanding and approach to overturning this relationship and leading our people to the freedom that we so desperately need and so very much deserve. So, this was the genesis of the capitalist system as a world economy created on the base of the enslavement of Africans and others. There's a lot that's been said here. There's a tremendous amount that's been said. We didn't say it came because the white man, because somehow we didn't pray didn't use voodoo. And, because that's why we won in Haiti, we're told, because we used voodoo. We didn't say why voodoo didn't keep us from becoming enslaved in the first place, but you understand, this is different approach. We say here's the basis of this damn relationship. You can deconstruct it. You can see what gave it birth. If you know what gave it birth, then you know what can destroy it, right? A scientific analysis of human society requires that we take a dialectical approach. We cannot see the world as static and ready-made.
Society has to be analyzed as a process that is in a constant state of motion, change, and development. There's always something new arising to replace the old, and all social motion occurs in relationship to this process of coming into existence and dying away. All social motion, all social motion. Europe's attack on Africa was effectively an assault on Africa's ability to produce life for itself. This assault has had the effect of pushing Africa and Africans out of history. History being the summation of the ongoing struggle to produce and reproduce life. That's what history is. Slavery, and, because people say, well, slavery, genocide, and colonialism are the stuff of which capitalism was born. African enslavement was first capital in the development of capitalism. The prevailing and African slavery provided first capital, and the African workers and so-called enslaved people were first workers in the capitalist system. The prevailing legal system, culture, religion, and general philosophical outlook or worldview constitute the superstructure of capitalism thus conceived. This superstructure is a natural product and reflection of this economic base of colonial slavery. This is where it comes from, right? You won't get this from Cornforth, but Cornforth, hopefully, this little discussion we have in Cornforth helps us to be able to approach this question, because it, and more effectively than we've done, many of us in the past. Slavery and colonialism gave rise not only to capitalism, but also to the capitalist and working classes alike of Europe and North America. See, the capitalist class, people want to talk to us, and miss this, and this self-serving kind of definition of capitalism and what it is and how it works. They want to talk about the bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie this, and the bourgeoisie that, but both the bourgeoisie and the working class, the white working class, exist on a pedestal of colonial enslavement of Africans and other oppressed peoples around the world. It was a requirement. This is what took the ordinary white person out of the serfdom and feudalism and the poverty that they experienced before. This is why Marx and others can talk about slavery being some progressive development in human society, because this thing did rescue Europe. It did rescue white people. It did rescue, it transformed what was otherwise people, peasants and serfs, tied to the land into the so-called working class that benefits now from the slavery along with the bourgeoisie. And so, yes, there's a contradiction between the workers and the bourgeoisie sitting on the pedestal, but that's not the profound, the fundamental contradiction. Okay, I hope we're riding on the same train. So we say the workers and the bourgeoisie, the two primary capitalist defining classes, have occasionally fought great battles with each other since their inception as contending social forces. But nevertheless, both were born and developed on a platform of slavery and colonialism. Consequently, what is often called class struggle inside the U.S. and Europe is actually contention among the workers and ruling class for control of the parasitic capitalist pedestal and its stolen resources. You with me? I hope that makes sense. And I hope that this discussion is informing us enough to how we came to this conclusion. We're not just saying this, we're saying how we came to the conclusions that we've come to. That's the science here. This makes it falsifiable. The parasitic foundation of world capitalism continues to exist up to now as a true economic base upon which the entire superstructure of the capitalist-defined, capitalist-dominated world exists. So we're saying that this parasitic foundation of world capitalism continues to exist. And it is as the true economic base upon which the entire superstructure of the capitalist-defined, capitalist-dominated world rests. Upon this economic base, the total existence of so-called white people and their ability to produce and reproduce life is dependent on this parasitic relationship that came into being with the attack by feudal Europe on Africa and the world. Instead of separate, more or less self-contained worlds existing in casual relationship to each other, there is one capitalist world system united by a parasitic economic relationship imposed by Europe upon the rest of us. So that's what we're saying. This is what dialectics teaches us, that this is the biscuit, more or less, that we've talked about. Instead of this separate, more or less self-contained world, or self-contained worlds existing in casual relationship to each other, there is one capitalist world system united by a parasitic economic relationship imposed by Europe upon the rest of us. We've just gone through a construction of the world that we live in. There is therefore no European reality separate from that of Africa and the rest of the world. The entire world is now locked into a single dialectical process, a unity of opposites, whereupon the gruesome extraction of life and resources from Africa and the rest of the world is a condition for the life and development of what we now know as Europe, white people, and the capitalist system to which we have been forcibly affixed. I heard a brief discussion, I think a week or two ago, on this radio station that was supposed to be, pretty progressive, supposed to be. And they were talking about some mysteries associated with quantum theory, quantum mechanics. And only thing I knew listening to that radio station was that African internationalism would solve those mysteries. Because it's stuff that they've overlooked, that African internationalism takes us, and I don't know anything about quantum physics. I'll have to, Dr. Aisha Fields, if you're listening to this or participate in this meeting, you know about quantum physics. I don't. But I knew this, I knew enough, just listening to this, that the mystery that they're looking for is no mystery at all, that using the correct approach, an African internationalist approach, we're going to help make this movement toward identifying this mystery associated with quantum mechanics. Yeah. I know that. I understood that. That's all I understood about that discussion that I heard on quantum physics. And part of what helps me understand, the reason I was just reminded of that, is looking at this. I want to go and look at this again. Think about this. There is therefore no European reality separate from that of Africa and the rest of the world. The entire world is now locked into a single dialectical process, a unity of opposites, whereupon the gruesome extraction of life and resources from Africa and the rest of the world is a condition for the life and development of what we now know as Europe, white people, and the capitalist system to which we have been forcibly affixed. And that's something that none of them has seen. And they are locked, their brains will not allow them to see that. You can't see that reality that we just talked about, so it's invisible. And I think even certain things about cancers are invisible. What makes it grow? How does it come about? Etc. And this African internationalist worldview helps us to get to this because it reveals what appears to be mysterious and unseeable, and there's something that only those of us who have to get out of the situation that we're in with the oppressor has defined reality based on its own needs, requirements, and experiences. It doesn't have to. It's just like the white man has never felt like he's had to understand a damn thing about our reality. He doesn't have to, because he forces us to act the way he wants us to act, and so our reality is often is something that he doesn't even know about. That's why he's always surprised when the revolutionary movement developed, because he's forced himself to believe that this entity that they created called the NAACP or the Urban League or the Black Lives Matter, that this is really speaking for black people, or the politicians that they've created and put in place. They actually convinced themselves after they've created them that this speaks for black people. So they can't see a damn thing because they don't have to see it because they feel like they've got the power. But the power is not there. You've been misled because the only thing you see is what you put in front of your own eyes, and what's not in front of your eyes is me. Somebody said, well, I'll never read about you in the newspaper. I don't see you. No, you sure don't. Because the ones who control the society and all of the means of producing and distributing information can't see me. The only thing they can see is their creatures. That reaffirms what? That reaffirms them. and their view of the world. Even when it's controversial, it's a reaffirmation of them and their view of the world. Anyway, African internationalism gives us a much better view of the world. The legal system, culture, white sense of sameness, and political institutions are reflections of this parasitic economic base. The legal system, the culture, the white sense of sameness, and political institutions are reflection of this parasitic economic base. In fact, you see the white sense of sameness being shattered in so many different ways because the economic base is shifting. That's what Brexit is. That's what the Catalonians in Spain. All of this stuff, that what brought them together was slavery and colonialism in the first place. That's the economic base that brought it all together. Now that this economic base is being shattered, is being fractured, so do the ideas of who they are, the unity that they have with each other being fractured and shattered. Every white aspiration and dream, every expectation for happiness and a good life, from a successful marriage to a secure future for their children, requires drone strikes in Pakistan, police murders and mass imprisonments in the African colonies and barrios of the U.S., and starvation and forced displacement of the oppressed throughout the world. I mean, you know, we look at news every day. We look at the so-called debates by the presidential candidates and whatever. They ain't got nothing to do with us. Nothing. Even when they talk about reparations and so, it ain't got nothing to do with it. This is white people or their representatives debating among themselves within context of preserving the existing social system and while advancing their own separate interests, group interests in the process of doing it. It got nothing to do with us. The slave is not involved in that discussion. These are people who look like the slave sometimes, but who represent white power who are having this discussion. They are quite convenient and quite handy for white power to have around, because it reaffirms for other white people that everything is all right, that these Negroes who are here talking this talk, they're doing it within a respectable arena that will not threaten the system, and people can debate and get upset and I don't owe reparations. I have nothing to do. I wasn't alive when this happened, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that stuff is happening. That's because the base, the real base, which is the African working class, from whom all this stuff is stolen, has not yet been heard, is not yet the most obvious participant in this discussion, because we're going to be heard differently. It's not going to be in some congressional debate or something like that. If people are going to act out their interests as the press. That's the way it always happens. And that's why it's always so shocking. Never saw it coming, never can see it coming. Total disrespect for the working class. And sometimes we don't have enough respect for ourselves. And that's what makes it so important to have an advanced detachment, a leading force, the force the organization capacity to fight and lead the struggle against imperialism. Because in order to make this revolution, and revolution we must make, there must be this revolutionary party that's guided by advanced revolutionary theory. Now I'm saying this without saying what revolution will look like, because I don't think we're going to go through this thing just like it did in the 60s anymore. I think we're seeing evidence right now all around us of how, and you can see it if you read the political reports that we're talking about. We see what constructed it, we see what's going to bring it down. And, you know, there will be armed struggle. There's no doubt about it. But armed struggle is not the definitive thing. It's like this cruel thing they have called bullfighting, you know, where this fancy dress ballet-looking, I forgot what you call the bullfighter now, dancing in front of the bull. So what is it? What is it? Toreador? Well, anyway, the guy with the who is dancing in front of him, pulling the cape, and the bull rushes this way and that way and exhausts itself. And at the end of the thing, you know, the bullfighter takes the sword out Do they call it the coup de grace? Is that where the coup de grace comes from? Somebody knows about bullfighting and stuff like that. But anyway, it kills the bull. There's this exhausted bull. Doesn't start off cutting the bull to death. It exhausts the bull. It makes the bull go this way and that way. And then very gracefully at the end of the thing, it takes the sword and kills the bull, with a single thrust most of the time. I think that's what we look at. That's what we're seeing around the world. The bull is being exhausted in Afghanistan, in Iraq, with Nicaragua, with Iran, with all of these different thrusts and all the different movement by the oppressed peoples around the world. I think this is a part of it. And by Black Power 96 and by Black Power Blueprint, this is a part of the process of exhausting the bull. The bull is being exhausted and the strength of the oppressed growing more and more every day. This is what we mean by dialectics, the old dying out and the new being born. This is what we mean when we're saying that the death, negation of the old is not simply saying no. It is also the beginning of a new process. It's a new process that's being born even as the old is being dying out. That's what the party has always moved in that fashion. So we create a reality. We create the future. We are in the process of creating the future, not just destroying the past. The future, part of the destruction of the past is to create the future. We are creating the future in the past, you see. And this new thing, this new form, this new development is a negation of the old, is the destruction of colonial capitalism. This is what we're talking about when we talk about this uneasy equilibrium. Recognizes this ongoing contest between the past and the future. And the fact that progress can be defined only as it relates to the success and growing strength of the new, and the new, those forces fighting against colonial capitalism, the oppressed and colonized peoples around the world, upon whose backs the entire rotten, foul, stinking edifice rests, and it's going to be rotten, foul, and stinking no matter how many sweet-talking, fast-talking, clever black politicians or white liberals and so-called communists who try to give it a new paint job. It's the same rotten social system. It is colonialism. It is slavery that has not only taken all of the resources that allow us to live as a people here and around the world. It's killing people all over the continent of Africa, all over Asia, every place in the world. That's the system. And there's no redeeming qualities. You cannot get $15 an hour over a period of years that's going to destroy that. What has to happen is the whole process of $15 an hour wage slavery resting on the base of our oppression and exploitation has to be destroyed. That has to be the thing that we're working at. That's what makes us African internationalists. Anyway. So, where are we? So, we say that, I want to read this sentence again. Say, every white aspiration and dream, every expectation for happiness and a good life, from a successful marriage to a secure future for their children, requires drone strikes in Pakistan, police murders and mass imprisonment in the African colonies and barrios of the U.S., and starvation and forced displacement of the oppressed throughout the world. And certainly that is true of Africa. And this is something that we really hope Africans can come to understand. That when you look and see a Brexit, when you look and see what's happening in Italy, when you look and see the contest between the Italians and the French, when you look and see the yellow vest, when you look and see the Trump emergence and this crisis, and all of these things, they come about as a consequence of the struggle of the oppressed people. We are the power. If we would organize it and move it, we bring it down just by our actions in defense of our own interests and recognizing what our own interests are. And the critical interest for African people is the unification, the liberation and total unification of Africa and African people around this world. This will bring the entire system down to its knees. It will have white power crawling on its belly, trying to be accepted by the rest of the world, and of course it will happen to no avail. White power has to be destroyed, and white power came into existence as capitalism off of the colonial enslavement of Africans and oppressed peoples around the world. So we say that while not fully appreciative of the parasitic foundation of the entire capitalist system resting on the brutal oppression of Africans and others, Karl Marx nevertheless recognized the relationship between the economic foundation of society and the resultant institutions and ideas. In his preface to a contribution to the Critique of Political Economy, published in 1859, Marx expounds on this relationship between the economic base and superstructure that defines society. Please, this is written the way European intellectuals spoke to each other. So it's kind of obtuse, but here's what he says. In the social production of their existence, men inevitably enter into definite relations which are independent of their will. As I say, whatever they want to do, they have to enter into these relationships, namely relations of production appropriate to a given stage in the development of their material forces of production. The totality of these relations of production constitutes the economic base of society, the real foundation on which arises a legal and political superstructure, and to which correspond definite forms of consciousness. So it's on this material basis, this superstructure, which correspond and where we have definite forms of consciousness born out of this base, this economic base. The mode of production of material life conditions the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. So how material life is created conditions the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. So if you got material life that's created through slavery and colonialism, it conditions the process of social, political, and intellectual life, what we think, how we act, what our relationships are. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. The changes in the economic foundation lead sooner or later to the transformation of the whole immense superstructure. We've defined the economic foundation as being the whole system born of colonial slavery, the domination of the entire world, the extraction of value by Europe coming out of feudalism, the extraction of value by Europe. That's where Europe came from, the idea of Europe, the idea of the Europeans. All of this comes from this process. So we say that changes in this economic foundation lead sooner or later to the transformation of the whole immense superstructure. So these changes lead to how the legal system, how culture, how the way people think happens. In studying such transformations, it is also necessary to distinguish between the material transformation of the economic conditions of production, which can be determined with the precision of natural science, and the legal, political, and the legal, political, religious, artistic, or philosophical, in short, ideological forms in which men become conscious of this conflict and fight it out. Let's say it again. In studying such transformations, it is always necessary to distinguish between the material transformation of the economic conditions of production, which can be determined with the precision of natural science, and the legal, political, religious, artistic, or philosophical, in short, ideological forms in which men become conscious of this conflict and fight it out. Just as one does not judge an individual by what he thinks about himself, so one cannot judge such a period of transformation by its consciousness. But on the contrary, this consciousness must be explained from the contradictions of material life, from the conflict existing between the social forces of production and the relations of production. That's what we talk about, the uneasy equilibrium. This thing is changing, and the material forces are changing. The material conditions are changing. The basis of the extraction of value and what it takes to live, now under assault by the oppressed peoples of the world, taking back our resources, and that affects the politics, the legal system, and how people think, how the rulers and white people think, because everything they've thought and achieved up to now has been based on this other relationship that's in a state of severe change and transformation. The era of struggle and resistance which our party was born was an era of ebb and flow in the challenge to this parasitic relationship. The survival and longevity of the African People's Socialist Party, our persistent involvement in and learning from the practical struggles of the African working class and the fighting and oppressed peoples of the world, among the things that prepared us more than any other political formation for the task that confront Africa, Africans, and the world today. The birth of capitalism did not simply involve the replacement of the old feudal economic system in Europe with a new system. The death of European feudalism threw the entire European world into turmoil. All the institutions and ideas that held feudal society together were challenged and sometimes cast aside, leaving Europeans with the frightening experience of ideological drift, foundering without a stable belief system. Even today, there is no, that's the thing that's under assault. Look at it. Everything is, look at the moral anchor to what is called Western or white civilization. The Catholic Church, the Pope. Who in the hell can even believe and follow that garbage anymore? Even if you're an idealist, even if you're somebody who believes in this super person entity that's out there in some other place in the world, how can you follow these rapists and pedophiliatic rapists and murderers and what have you? And this is what they do and what they have done. Even things like the Boy Scouts and all of these other entities who come in, this is the moral foundation. The Boy Scouts, this is what they're turning out, real wonderful young white kids who are going to be the leaders in the new society. The people who have responsibility of training young children, athletes and what have you, rapists and pedophiles. The whole rotten social system is just exposing itself to the whole world. It's all coming down. And every idea that they've had that contributes to this sense of superiority. And now Europeans have this really difficult situation. I think somebody's at the door. This really difficult situation of other peoples who entered into this discussion of defining reality. Because up to now, white people had the power to say, this is how it is, we are the subject of history, and everybody has to do and believe and think what we believe. And now peoples of the world, sometimes with guns in their hands, are saying, no, that ain't the way it is, whitey. You understand? And now white people in this most uncomfortable place, now not only seeing their ability to steal everything from the peoples of the world apparently being wasted, but their definition of each other being challenged. And so that's why everybody is a terrorist, everybody is just horrible people, and that's why you have to hug killers in courtrooms so that it reaffirms the existence and viability and of the whole social system. That's why, as opposed to the brother killing the white woman who killed his brother, which would have been a normal reflex, and everybody in the black community going to the court after this and shooting her, doing something like that, everybody lines up to grind with her, to give her some kisses and stuff including the damn judge. Yeah. This is a social system in a state of severe distress. Where are you going after this? Yeah. Right. What's your next move? Okay. What can you go after this? This is what we're looking at. So that you have this frightening experience of ideological drift, foundering without a stable social belief system. And what makes it so important, this is why Barack Osama, what's his name, what's his Barack name? What's the fellow's name? Barry. What's his name? Barack Hussein Obama. This is one of the reasons that he is important. This is why you have to have a Colin Powell standing up and telling the world, the Rockets plan to kill everybody there, these secret stuff like that, because they believe the colonized. The colonized have been the victim so long, so you got a colonial subject who now saying, okay, go kill everybody because that's the right thing to do. You got a Barack Obama. You got somebody who's telling you that you're in good hands with Allstate. Black person, you know. I mean, insurance salesman. Who in the hell believes in insurance salesman? But you got a Negro who does it, and everybody knows Negroes are all right. So you got black people selling the system for them now. They got these Africans acting as shills. You got Ray Charles, who's singing what is it he sings? That's not the style. I'm not talking about Georgia, the Lynch capital at one juncture, but this other song, America the Beautiful and stuff like that. These have become the proponents because the stuff is falling in such disfavor. Nobody believes the white man anymore. You understand? And so they get Africans to be shields for them. That's why you got Negro politicians in every city fronting for white power, fronting for hunkyism, because nobody believes in that stuff anymore, right? So anyway, so we say that they're without, the Europe in a frightening experience of ideological drift, confounding without a stable belief system, and we helping them to believe in themselves. So we come and hug the killer pig, and we sing songs about America, and we sell insurance, and we run for office and say there's no white America and no black America. It's such a reaffirming kind of thing, but it's all over. And the fact is that you know it's over because you have to dip down into the barrel to drag out these slithering animals to represent you. The future is coming, and there's nothing you can do to stop it with these card tricks and parlor tricks and the rest of that. So we say this is because capitalism required a different set of values and beliefs than feudal society. In feudal society, the church had been a powerful presence in the life of Europeans for 1,000 years. The divine right of kings functioned as a key belief of feudal society that tied the peasant serfs to the land and service to the lords and nobility, fettering every aspect of their lives. In addition to the social chaos that befell Europe with the arrival of capitalism, the existing philosophical coherence was also a casualty. It was the end of one world, and with it the end of the effectiveness of a worldview. And that's why every crisis like this, you see these people coming out talking about the end of the world. The end of the world is near. There's a time when fathers will fight sons and daughters will fight mothers, and wars will happen. Yep. It's the end of time. It's the end of your time and the beginning of a whole new process. That is negation. So, but the end, just to say it's the end of your time doesn't mean it's the end. It means it's the end of your time. And this process is the beginning of another time. That's what we mean when we talk about negation. It's not just saying no. It's saying that thing is dying, but something new is being born of it. In addition to the social chaos that befell Europe with the arrival of capitalism, the existing philosophical coherence was also a casualty. It was the end of one world, and with it, the end of the effectiveness of a worldview. Karl Marx was one of the many who vigorously sought to explain the world and Europe's destiny in the world, although generally the Europeans saw the destiny of Europe and the world as being the same thing. They still do. What is the destiny of white people is the destiny of the world. That's how Europeans view that. It's like General Motors used to say what's good for General Motors is good for America. What's good for white people is good for everybody, good for the world. That's the basic foundation of the thought process here. And it's resting on the material foundation, material basis of colonial slavery. So Marx's Capital and other works were products of this effort to explain the world and Europe's destiny. That's what it was about. You can act like Marx was some biblical force if you want to. You can treat Capital and all of the works of Marx as some biblical force if you want to, as this thing that was brought down from the mountain, written on stone by Moses, but it ain't the case. Marx's Capital and other works were products of this effort to explain the world and Europe's destiny. That's what it was. It was an attempt by a society of forces in a society to explain that society at the death death throes of one social system was going out of existence, another was trying to emerge. In Marx, capitalism was the only thing. You had, anarchism, nihilism, all of these other expressions, seeing the death of one social system and trying to explain it in the emergence of another. And they were all tethered to the social system itself. The fact that an explanation for the dying social system and the social system that was arising. Moreover, Marx sought to distinguish himself and his work not simply as attempts to explain the world, but as agents for changing the world. Today, the people of the world find ourselves very much in the same situation as the Europeans of dying feudal society. We are watching and experiencing the world changing beneath our very feet. The old world is gone. The white ruling class is busily, frantically attempting to explain the world and humanity's destiny in it while refusing to recognize that the social system is irreversibly broken. It cannot be fixed. No explanation based on an assumption of the continued domination of white power, whether by socialist workers or the capitalist bourgeoisie, will suffice. This is the significance of African internationalism at this historical moment. African internationalists understand that what is required is the ideological leadership to show the way forward. Only we are able to explain the crisis of the old dying capitalist system. Only we can predict the unfolding future shaped by the oppressed masses of the people whose resistance deprives the capitalist parasite of access to the resources, life, and blood of the colonized, subject, and dominated people whose conditions of existence represent the foundation of capitalist white power and imperialism as we know it today. Unlike Marxism and the bourgeois philosophers that have been blinded by their relationship with the world, African internationalism gives Africans and the oppressed our world, and the African internationalism gives the Africans and the oppressed our own voices and our own brains capable of investigating the world from our reality and making an analysis stemming from that investigation. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And I hope that we've set up the terms for having a real fruitful discussion. Uhuru.
Let's salute our leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, for your powerful study. That was off the chain, Chairman.
Uhuru.
It's now time to open up the questions for my audience and online viewers. We want to appreciate everyone who's tuning in via Facebook and YouTube, and also appreciate all of your engagement. Please continue to invite your friends and family to this study and share widely on all of your social media platforms.
Sister Comrade, may I interrupt? I know that we are supposed to show a brief video. I want to do that now. The reason I want to do it now because I do want us to have questions and discussion, but I don't want people after the question and discussion to just go away, right? I think the video is really important, so I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to show that. Can we do that? Let's do that then. So I apologize for this. I only learned shortly before this that the video was going to be shown after the questions, after the discussion. And people, have a tendency, once we say what we want to say, of cutting it off. If we can do this, expeditiously, let's show the video. It's a brief video, brothers and sisters, comrades. And you need to watch it, and then might even facilitate whatever questions and interventions that you want to make. Go ahead.
Now is the time to throw off all hesitation. Open up new fronts for protest, demonstration, and anti-imperialist action.
The Black and Black Coalition recognize that it's not enough to call for peace. We call for 2, 3, many Venezuela.
From the ballot box to the barricades.
The boldest, newest vision, progressive platform that you will find out there in the world today.
As an act to deepen the crisis of imperialism.
This system is a foul social system born of slavery and genocide. It will never do anything for us.
Every protest against police and white civilian murder of our people.
Y'all think it's cool to kill black people and then get on paid leave?
These police, man, these pigs, they are everywhere in our community, everywhere.
County police, state police, you name it. If there's a police organization, it is here.
Every mass mobilization to demand the end of the cruel, bloody economic war against Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Cuba, Iran, Korea, and Russia.
The other wars, not just the one that might send some white kid to some place in the Middle East, but all these other wars.
The protesters continued to circle Times Square.
The attack that the U.S. is planning to launch against Syria represents an overall attempt on the part of U.S. imperialism to maintain its control over that region of the world.
We have to give them a problem that they can only solve to benefit us. Do you understand?
The U.S. and all imperialist powers, new and old, must be expelled from Africa, and the U.S. domestic colonial occupation forces known as police must be driven out of our colonized communities as part of the struggle against colonialism and imperialism.
I'm a revolutionary. Let me just tell you that right up front. I'm a revolutionary. I think that you have to overturn the whole damn system before we will ever be free. But I recognize that everybody in here ain't revolutionary. We need activity and action by masses of people who've never heard of revolution, never thought about revolution, but they believe in something called justice.
Join the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations for our annual march on the White House in Washington, D.C. on November 2nd and 3rd. For more information, go to www.blackisbackcoalition.org.
Uhuru. We want to welcome our viewers from Kingston, New York, Newark, New Jersey, Tucson, Arizona, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, London, the UK, occupied Tanzania, Houston, Texas, Huntsville, Alabama, Boston, Massachusetts, Toronto, Canada, Tampa, Florida, Clearwater, aka Wick City, St. Petersburg, Washington State, San Diego, California, Minneapolis, and I believe I saw the Netherlands earlier, Hempstead, New York, Chicago, Illinois, and Mayfield, Illinois. And Kirsten Ortham from Spokane is viewing on YouTube and sent a salute, and she says, Uhuru, good morning, tuning in from Washington State. Salute the work of the African People's Socialist Party, all of its institutions, and unwavering and strong leadership. Uhuru. This is from Maisha Bright from Baltimore, and she commented and said, their strength is in the psychological effects of brainwashing to evoke fear through lies and visuals in their favor to cause the population to be fooled into the defeat and cancellation of the people's own power. Those who know the process have the ability to overtake this form of thinking and reject the colonized psychosis of America. And Holly from Boston said, these metaphors are so helpful, Chairman. You make revolution easy to understand through worms and butterflies and bacon and butter. This is an excellent study. I'm tuning in from Boston, Massachusetts. And here we have a question, and the question is, Uhuru Chairman, could you comment on the philosophy of the late Dr. Amos N. Wilson and whether his ideology was materialist and whether it was compatible with African internationalism?
Well, Dr. Amos Wilson was certainly a materialist, generally speaking, and he had real practical approach. He was able to recognize certain contradictions that exist between African people and white power, and he came up with practical suggestions about how to take that on. He wrote a really important kind of book. It's a real thick book. I think, what is it? Was it Black Blueprint for Black Power? Yeah. And so I thought it was an important book. It's not an African internationalist. I mean, didn't capture the whole origin of the social system itself and what it would take to destroy the social system. There was, if I remember correctly, and I'm not a student of Dr. Wilson, so I want to say that right off the bat, but if I remember correctly, it made certain assumptions about the ability of African people to achieve power and success without necessarily destroying the power and success of imperialist white power, which is the basis for our lack of power and success. But I appreciate the work that he did. I thought it was really important because it, if nothing else, it did assault, it attacked some of the mysterious things that's offered to our communities as explanations for our reality, you know. Uhuru.
Michael Appian in Huntsville is viewing on YouTube, and he says, Uhuru, Chairman, powerful study. Do you believe there's a way to show the ADOS folks how backwards their theory is, or do we just meet them on the other side of the battlefield? Uhuru.
Uhuru. Well, the ADOS folks, I mean, we don't know exactly what we mean by that. I have my own suspicions about the birth and arrival of ADOS on the political scene at this really important time. But, you know, it's just like Black Lives Matter. You know, like a lot of people are attracted to it because they see it as a response to the murders that's happening to us, and they don't have the benefit of an African internationalist worldview. They don't have the benefit of the presence of the African People's Socialist Party doing what we're supposed to do. And I think that's true with the ADOS thing. I mean, as quiet as it's kept, you know, the African People's Socialist Party has been involved in the reparations demand and work since 1976 at least. And we initiated the first campaign in the world to popularize the reparations demand, not only in this country but around the world. I mean, I traveled throughout Europe to African communities with the reparations demand. And that's not a little thing, because when you're traveling through Europe in some places, you're also traveling indirectly through Africa, because the Africans in many places in Europe have a different relationship to Africa than we who living here, who would have to cross the Atlantic to get to Africa. In Europe, Africans are often in and out of the continent, where their cousins and mamas and stuff like that still live. So we took the reparations demand there. We made it a popular demand. We actually had a World Tribunal on reparations for African people in 1982. So, and then on that tribunal, I'm glad you raised that question, because we had international judges. We put the U.S. government on trial using international law. And some of the judges on that international tribunal were from South Africa, or Zania, from Senegal, and I think Congo. And because of that, there was some narrow organization inside the United States who were opposed to what we did because they said that there were judges on there from on the continent of Africa, and they owe us reparations too, meaning African people on the continent of Africa, which is crazy, in the same way that you'd have to deny reparations for African people in the United States based on the logic that they used, because they said Africans in Africa sold us into slavery. Well, you can make an argument that there were Africans in the United States who owned slaves too as well. So do you say that that's not the primary contradiction? I mean, that's crazy, that's insane. And to say that what it is an attempt to create this artificial contradiction between African people. So even before anything that approximates reparation is offered up, we start fighting over whether black people, just Africans in the United States, should get it, where Africans other places should be able to get reparations as well. We want every damn thing, and Africans everywhere. The assault, listen, just think about this, because this whole nonsense about how, I heard somebody make the statement about Mexicans, you know, like
you know, we fought for civil rights and no Mexicans here and they taking advantage of our fight for civil rights. You fought for civil rights on Mexican stolen land. You know, I mean, if the Mexicans weren't there with you, it was because they were trying to get out from under the boot of the white people who were extracting value from them on their own land. That's a horrible thing. And then if you look at the poverty and desperate situation on the continent of Africa, it's because Africa came under assault. The reason you can talk about reparations for Africans in the United States is because an attack was made on Africa by Europe and white people that turned Africa into the place that we're looking at today. It's been an ongoing war. It's been unending. And that what we brought that war with us to the United States. We're a product of that war. So we weren't born here. Dialectics teaches us that. Dialectics teaches us that the struggle we're involved in has its origin in the attack on Africa, dummy. And so, you know, we won't say dummy because we'll be more polite than that because we don't want people to get so emotionally wrought that we can't have, you know, a meaningful kind of discussion around this question. But dialectics teaches us that. And to say that, first of all, is presuppose that, again, that there's a solution for African people in this country that's separate and independent of a solution for African people other places around the world. One. Two, it does not recognize that the whole capitalist system, all the value that exists inside this this country, which is a part of the value that exists inside the whole European world, has its origin in the attack on Africa. This capitalist system was born from this process. They didn't build capitalism just for putting black people on plantations in Mississippi in this country. The whole process is what we have to consider. That's what dialectics teaches us. Uhuru. Yeah.
Uhuru, I just really want to appreciate this whole series of dialectical materialism and African internationalists, and I consider it an honor to be able to be brought into a situation where, you know, the African working class have a theory, and how the importance of that, and how it literally changed your whole life. Because now you can see the world as it is. And you can fight for your own interests because we always fighting against our interests when we think we're fighting for our interests. So I just really appreciate this whole theory. And Chairman, like when I just really, the part where you were talking about like how we take, you know, as being the international president, I'm trying to get my words. Being the international president, you know, this study right here is so critical to every party force, not only in EPDM, but any organizer, to use this practice. And how you were talking about how we have write a POA and then how we can sum up, and that's why we use criticisms and self-criticisms to be able to study what it is that we did. And we have a formula on like how to carry the work out, and when we don't produce what we say we produce, or we even less than what we know we can produce, can go back.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying, and study it. And I just, you know, just how practical this study was very fruitful and very good. And we had a discussion, and I was trying to follow you in the car in Philly when you were talking about the egg and how the contradiction changes form. And I think, I don't have the words to explain it, but I think I had an aha moment in this study when you were talking about how, you know, the bacon and, you know, how you take all these different ingredients and form it. Am I on the right page of what we were talking about in Philly? Do you even know what I'm talking about?
Maybe because I'm a vegan now and eggs and bacon don't appeal to me, but go ahead.
You were talking about how, what I got out of it is that you were saying that, you know, the egg and the contradiction being inside the egg, and then you put it on the stove or you put heat on it and it changes form.
Yeah.
And they couldn't get that. They couldn't understand it.
Well, yeah, well, one of the